Ready.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Earl Hall, Executive Director, Syracuse Builders Exchange, here with lawyer Ed Sheats from Sheats and Bailey, welcoming you yet to another episode of the Syracuse Builders Exchange webinars. So today we're here to review guidance that was issued earlier this morning. Empire State Development released the most recent guidance this morning around 9 o'clock. And the objective today is to review that guidance with you and to address any questions you might have. Before I begin, was told that I have a face for radio and a voice for newspaper, along with you, Ed.
It's true.
So bear with us as we go through this. We are not meant to be broadcast live, but yet here we are. So thanks for tuning in. Some housekeeping items. Email us with questions. Earlier today, an email went out from the association advising employers that you can email myself or Ed during the webinar, and we will attempt to answer as many questions as we possibly can. Lisa has reminded me to like us on Facebook and to subscribe and like the Builders Exchange videos on the YouTube channel. So the last time we were together was on March 27th when ESD issued 3 bullet point guidance for construction. And it was very muddy, and we attempted to navigate through that. And I think for the most part, it's been relatively calm, although we'll get into some issues that you employers have been subjected to on construction projects that have been deemed essential. And in some cases, I use that word loosely. While we have had webinars in the past 2 weeks on relevant issues, somewhat dry issues specific to the CARES Act, risk management, paid family leave acts, these ESD webinars, for whatever reason, appear to be very popular with the industry. So thank you for tuning in today. Some of the new items we're going to evaluate with the new guidance include under Section 9, construction. As you can see, that's been significantly enhanced with words. Words have meaning. However, in debating the meaning of some of these words with attorneys this morning, confusion may still exist, and we'll get into that with Ed later on. 2 very important items under the new guidance under section number 9 are the last 2 paragraphs of the section are brand new. And we're going to dive into that as well so that hopefully you understand exactly what it means and what it does not mean, okay? Because they use the words business location / construction sites, and they use those words for a reason, and we'll define those to the best of our knowledge. In addition, you'll find in the last paragraph that local government should postpone non-essential work. Councilor Sheats will get into that as well.
I will.
I know since March 27th, the contractors regionally and across the state have endured a wide variety of disruptions, issues that have really been problematic. I've heard them from not only our members, but on my conference calls with my peer association executives across the state. In particular, people are venting about particular projects. How can those particular projects be deemed essential and some non-essential? Why is one of the most recognizable sports stadiums continuing to proceed with construction? Well, that's easy. They have to secure that structure, which they can do per ESD guidance. However, when that structure is secured, they then will need a waiver. And that process, I suspect, has already been done. Another large stadium project here in central New York is progressing without a waiver. Why is that? Well, it's a government-owned property. And the government, in this case the county, can proceed to define a project essential. However, we will get in later on to the last paragraph under section 9. Is the owner exempt from some of these projects, and define essential? So I would caution contractors, because we have heard a wide range of stories from contractors who are being told by project owners that their project is essential. For example, you could have a large commercial project that has luxury apartments in it, and a private developer, who from all accounts is an excellent developer, deemed his project essential by virtue of authority given to him by him and nobody else.
That has happened.
And it gets better when that developer in writing agrees to indemnify and hold harmless those contractors, encouraging them to show up to work in the event they're fined. And Councilor Sheats will get into that
I can
a
do
little
that.
bit later on, and we had issued a written opinion on that earlier in the week, cautioning our employers to be very, very careful. Private owners, absent them meeting the guidance, cannot define themselves as essential except for the guidance that's been issued. So keep that in mind. Social distancing has become a huge issue. Ed, I know your phone has been ringing off the hook, mine has as well. We're finding that all projects are subject to mandatory social distancing. I know there's confusion in the most recent guidance and the guidance that was issued last week, but we believe that the guidance is clear. You must practice social distancing on that project, or the project should be suspended. We're aware that project owners and general contractors in some cases are pressuring the subcontractors or the GCs to come up with safety plans that address this. And in many cases, you cannot address and have a safety plan for something that is impossible. Okay, so Ed will get into documenting all of those instances, putting the project owner and or construction manager on notice about those issues. We'll get into that in a little bit, to protect your rights. In some cases, we're finding owners are shifting liability back onto a general contractor or back onto a subcontractor, and I know many law firms regionally have been working with their clients to address that. So keep your eyes open for that as well. Social distancing does apply to all construction sites, period. So even though people might be wearing respirators on a job site or facial mask, there is no guidance that says such will circumvent the social distancing edict that is out there. So be careful on that as well. We understand too that jobs have been disrupted for a lack of delivery of material. We're understanding too that many projects are being disrupted and many employers are being put in a contractual bind by virtue of the fact employees are refusing to show up to work for safety reasons. And we can address that as well later today. Getting lots of questions, where does OSHA stand on all of this? And I provided a little bit of guidance on that. We have a resource in Buffalo who represents this region who is outstanding. They don't have any guidance other than best practices right now on a job site. And I think that we've probably distributed that to the industry at this point. They are still focusing on the significant safety issues on commercial construction sites that they've always focused on. So I can't say that they won't be on your job site looking at COVID-related matters, but that is not their focus at this point. Their focus is on the serious injuries or the fatal injury hazards that exist on construction sites. I do suspect when the COVID matter concludes and society returns to normal, you will see OSHA issue revised best practices and mandates going forward on all construction sites. I don't know when that will occur, but I do believe OSHA will get involved in that as well. Be very, very, very careful, because now the Attorney General's Office of New York State and the New York State Department of Labor are now canvassing New York State, and they are visiting job sites. So I do know of a project in Auburn earlier today where the New York State Police and a codes enforcement officer showed up and shut the site down. And what I told that individual was, be thankful it wasn't the Department of Labor, because most likely there was a significant fine associated with that. So in the event that were to occur, I suspect they're going to question you about why you're on the site and request that you provide them a series of answers in writing at some point. And if that were to occur, I would suggest you get advice of counsel on that before you proceed. In the end, when in doubt, reflect on the spirit of the executive order and the spirit of the guidance, and reflect upon the time in our lives that we're at today, which is unlike anything we've ever seen. Seek advice of counsel where necessary, and continue to communicate with the association, as we really enjoy hearing from members. We enjoy trying to help you. And keep in mind, though, that we will stay in our lane. We will not provide you with risk management advice. We will not provide you with insurance advice, and we will certainly not provide you with legal advice. However, we are here to advocate for you and to support you and help you where we can. So, Counselor, with that, I will turn the seminar over to you, Ed Sheats from Sheats and Bailey, and on the phone is Diana Plew from Sheats and Bailey, and Diana specializes in HR and insurance matters. But I got to thank Jason Bailey as well from Sheats and Bailey. Jason has been instrumental in bouncing different things off from and getting advice as well. So, Ed, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Earl. As you can all see, Earl and I are today practicing our own version of social distancing here. We've got about 6 feet between us. And again, Diana is with us. I'd like to thank Tom Chick once again with Real World IT support, because once again, Tom, on about 3 hours' notice, has come through for us, and here we are, broadcasting. I can't give legal advice today. Please understand that. There's a number of reasons for that, not the least of which is whatever question you may send us, which we will answer, but whatever question you send us is going to exist in a context that we don't have. And that context includes your construction contract, subcontract, purchase order, whatever documents you have. In order for us to advise somebody, we typically need to see what the contract says. Contracts are all different. They say different things. Even the standard forms are quite typically changed by supplementary conditions. So my goal today is to share information. In doing that, I'm going to go through, and we have some slides, some PowerPoint slides, go through the changes that occurred this morning to the Esd Guidance. Now again, you start with an executive order. By the way, there have been 15 of them. Executive Order 202 is the executive order that started it all, and we now have 202.14 out there. So almost every other day or so, the Esd, Empire State Development, has, or the governor's office rather, I should say, has issued something changing, supplementing, modifying, explaining, expanding on the original Executive Order 202. So these things have been changing. They will continue to change. Now, we're not going to have all the answers. In fact, I'm probably going to have some questions because, unfortunately, we have some ambiguities and some things that are very unclear that have been created by the guidance that came out this morning. If you do not have that guidance up on your screen, on your tablet, on your desktop, what have you, please pull that up and you can scroll along with us. It's at the New York State, it's at esd.ny.gov, esd.ny.gov. From time to time, you'll see me looking away because questions are coming through on the email. Please, as you send us the questions, we'll do what we can to answer them today, but we won't be able to answer them all today, simply because we're not going to be able to do that in the time. But Jason, Earl, and I will get back to you between tomorrow and over the weekend. So, that being said, Tom is our slide master. What's next? go back to the email addresses. If in pause, these are the email addresses. We have 5 of us in the office out of Syracuse. There's email addresses there for us if you don't otherwise know us or have not otherwise communicated with us. And our website is theconstructionlaw.com. Also, there is Earl's email address. So if you need a source or if you need the address to send a question to today or tomorrow or whenever, those are the addresses. I'll do my best to remember, and maybe Tom can remind me to come back to those toward the end of our discussion. And Tom, next. This is the website. If you don't have it up, please pull it up because it'll help a lot. And then next. Now, to begin, as you're looking at the guidance on the website that ESD issued this morning, there are things that are new, things that have changed. Many of the things have stayed the same. But the first thing I want to talk about has to do with public works projects and the 2 portions of this guidance published today that address public works. What's up on your screen right now reads, state and local governments, including municipalities, authorities, and school districts, are exempt from these essential business reductions, but are subject to other provisions that restrict non-essential in-person workforce and other operations under EO 202. So let's take that, I'll go back. Let's take that a step at a time. The first clause tells us, without any doubt, that state and local governments, schools, municipalities are exempt from the essential business workforce reductions. Okay. The next one I have here, I've taken these a little bit out of order, but this is a sub-paragraph in paragraph number 9, which is construction, which reads in a similar fashion. As noted above, local governments, including, to begin with, as noted above. The as noted above is referring to the clause that I just read, which came from the 3rd paragraph on the 1st page of the guidance. As noted above, local governments, including municipalities and school districts, are allowed to continue construction projects at this time as government entities are exempt from these essential business restrictions. Period, end of sentence. So we're told twice, pretty clearly, that these public entities are exempt, and that's good. However, and it says however, this clause, this paragraph that you see on your screen, is essentially the same thing that we saw a couple of Sundays ago that came out from ESD. And it carries this second sentence, or 2 sentences, which seem to make things a little fuzzy. However, to the greatest extent possible, local governments should postpone any non-essential projects and only proceed with essential projects when they can implement appropriate social distancing and cleaning/disinfecting protocols. Essential projects should be considered those that have a nexus to health and safety of the building occupants or to support the broader essential services that are required to fulfill the critical operations of government or the emergency response to the COVID-19 public health crisis. Now, so we have 2 sentences that very clearly tell us these public entities and school districts are exempt. Then they add that. In my world, people spend a lot of money to litigate things like the meaning of the word must versus may, or shall versus should, because they really do mean different things. And in Earl's world, as executive director of the Construction Employers Association of Central New York, I'm sure he runs into those clauses as well and the meaning of those words. We're told very clearly that these are exempt. These entities are exempt. Then the second clause and the third clause continue to tell us what we should be doing, should postpone, okay? Well, it's not a must. It's not a will. It's not a shall. It's a should. And I'm not being trite, but it's also not the word may. These are the types of things that frustrate us out here in private practice and frustrate you out there in construction. Because one might point out that there could have been a much better way for the ESD to word this, especially when they had a couple of weeks since it was originally issued by way of an email, to address the problem and make it clear. But let us assume that they mean what they mean when they say it twice, that these projects are exempt. Earl?
No, I don't have any comment on that. I mean, I think everybody is familiar with the fact that public entities, for whatever reason, circumvent private, because I suppose we're used to being dictated by governmental authorities in New York State. And I don't want to get up on my soapbox about that, but that's what's frustrating, is that you could have a governmental project that any prudent person would look at and say, that's not essential within the spirit of the guidance and in light of our circumstances. Yet why is a governmental entity provided authority to put construction workers in harm's way, potentially, by working on a non-essential project that is now defined as essential by virtue of the fact they're a governmental entity or a school district? And I think that frustrates a lot of people, and it creates confusion.
I think it does. I think it does. But that's what we've got. Again, I didn't say we were going to have all the answers, but we're going to do our best. Now, I started with that exemption because it is one of the things that is added. Tom, if you'd go back a slide, those words there are added to the new ESD guidance. When the guidance was issued on March 27, 2020, the ESD guidance, A, did not contain this paragraph. This paragraph is now the third of the first original or beginning paragraphs. Also, the March 27 guidance then listed 12 essential businesses. That has been changed today to now list 14 essential businesses. We're going to run through a number of these. I'm going to take the essential businesses that have changed and identify only the changes. So, in a minute, I'll be talking about the first list from the essential services or healthcare operations. And I'm going to hop through these until we come to construction, where, of course, we're then going to spend some time identifying things. As you look at that first page on the website, you're going to see that it says, for purposes of Executive Order 202.6, essential business shall mean businesses operating in or as, there's a colon, and then follow the 14 new items. Now, oddly enough, Executive Order 202.6 was issued on March 18 and was the executive order that said employers should go to a 50% at home, 50% at work workforce, which we know has changed. It's now 0 and 100 unless you can come in under one of these exceptions. So why they didn't modify that, I don't know, but they didn't. Tom, let's go to the next slide and the next. Number 1, essential healthcare operations. I'm going to do this quickly. But these essential businesses are important because if you're working on one of these essential projects, your work will be permitted to pursue, you'll be permitted to continue that work. What has been added to the previous March 27 list of essential healthcare operations are emergency chiropractors, which I guess they must have, physical therapy, prescribed by a medical professional, so I guess you have to have a prescription, and occupational therapy prescribed by a medical professional. Okay? Those are changes. I'm not going to dwell on them. I just want you to see, the listeners to see where changes have occurred. Earl, any comment on those?
No,
few?
sir.
Okay. Tom, the next. Skipping number 2, which was essential infrastructure, just because it has not changed. Number 3, essential manufacturing. It includes these additions: automobiles and any parts or components necessary for essential products that are referenced within this guidance. Okay? So presumably auto parts and the like. Any parts, Tom, please go back. Any parts or components necessary for essential products that are referenced within the guidance. That's manufacturing. I'll move on, Earl, unless you had any thoughts or
Please
comments on
proceed.
that.
No?
The next is number 4, essential retail. Now, this has been relevant to a number of our clients who are in the process of building, remodeling, repairing retail facilities. The 2 bullets on your screen are what has been added to the list of essential retail. Again, the others are still there. The others are grocery stores, pharmacies, convenience stores, farmers markets, gas stations, restaurants and bars for takeout or delivery, hardware, appliance and building materials, pet food, and then these 2 new ones: telecommunications to service existing customers and accounts, and delivery for orders placed remotely via phone or online at non-essential retail establishments, etc. Earl, any comments on those?
No, sir.
Okay. Tom, the next one. The March 27 list of essential services is already quite lengthy. Nothing has been removed, but these new 3 have been added, one of which in a different form, the first bullet, was the subject of something that the Department of Agriculture and Markets put out last week,
Right.
which, by the way, the Syracuse Builders Exchange seized on that and sent a notice out to its members with regard to that change. So in the list of essential businesses, essential services businesses include landscaping, but only for maintenance or pest control and not cosmetic purposes. Now, I find that A, a little puzzling, B, different by a bit than what was issued with that Department of Agriculture and Markets guide or memo from last week. But we have a restriction here which a couple of clients separately called me because they were quite frustrated with this. Because most of you know, if you're a Division II contractor, if you're a site contractor, you've got operating engineers, they're in the cab. The cab is very often climate controlled, and those pieces of equipment are well more than 6 feet apart, working across the site. But you can only do landscaping for maintenance or pest control and not cosmetic, not to make it pretty. Earl, I would bet you've had some calls on this one.
Well, we did, and I'm going to save the landscaping question for the end
Okay.
when we do the Q&A, because there's one of the region's predominant landscapers was nice enough to send us in a question. But
Oh, good.
I think Section 5 is critical here, Ed, and here's why. This encompasses quite a bit of quote-unquote essential work or businesses. So, I'm looking at this list and I'm seeing quite a few things on here that our members might be subject to, but in addition, some of the scope of work on those properties that might have to be performed. You follow me?
I do.
So I think that this list here expands upon quite a bit about opportunities to continue to perform work for businesses that are defined by this guidance. So I find this somewhat helpful, especially the bullet where it says warehouse, distribution, and fulfillment, as we know
Yes.
that there's a couple of those regionally.
Yes.
I know one in Liverpool applied for a waiver and got a waiver, but it begs the question, why would they apply for the waiver in the first place? And that I can't answer. But we'll get into that a little bit later on.
Good.
But this list here is encouraging because it opens up a lot of construction opportunities on existing properties that are deemed essential. So those are my only comments on this section.
And they're good points. The next new bullet in the middle here under essential services is another one that, well, I would have worded it differently. Designing, comma, printing, comma, publishing and signage companies to the extent that they support essential businesses or services. Now, so Earl Hall, what does designing mean? Does this open the door to answer a question that was raised before on March 27 about design professionals?
Are they architects?
What does this mean? If I look at the education law and I
Yeah.
look at the definitions of architect and engineer in the education law, you know, they're designers to be sure.
Right.
And the essential services could have said design professionals, architects, engineers, surveyors. It didn't say that, but now it says designing. Designing what? Why not just design?
Yeah.
Okay, right? So they've added something, but they've created a little more confusion here. And, well, I guess I'm sorry about that, but designing, printing, publishing, and signage companies. Is the word designing meant to qualify signage or printing and publishing? It's poorly worded. I don't have an answer to that question. Like I said, I'm going to be asking some questions and identifying some questions that I don't yet have an answer to. But certainly a design professional might want to seize on this one to say, hey, look, as long as we're in support of essential businesses, we are designing. We are providing the design services described or defined by the education law to include architecture, engineering, surveying, et cetera, et cetera. And the next one is remote instruction with regard to classes and schools and fitness, which I'm not going to put any time on because.
Well, Ed, can I just jump on that one?
I wish you would.
And it has nothing to do with the guidance other than the Builders Exchange last week launched a virtual training opportunity for the OSHA 10 and the OSHA 30 classes. So
Nice.
to learn more about that, Melissa or Lisa on our staff here can help you, but it's a way for us to deliver the much needed OSHA 10s to your employees virtually.
Great.
And Lisa Brownson, who is very closely working with us here on education and safety training, she vetted the program thoroughly, and we're really pleased that we can deliver that. And stay tuned, because our next objective is to deliver additional safety training classes electronically over the next couple of weeks. So we're working on that.
Excellent. Tom, our next one should be our favorite, which is number 9. Number 9 is much longer than the one paragraph that you see on your screen. We're going to take it a paragraph or so at a time. Number 9 begins with something that was in substance and some there before on the March 27 guidance. Construction. All non-essential construction must safely shut down, except emergency construction. E.g., for example, a project necessary to protect health and safety of the occupants, or to continue a project if it would be unsafe to allow to remain undone, but only to the point that it is safe to suspend work. Okay? So this begins where it began on March 27, really. Non-essential construction must safely shut down unless it's an emergency, health and safety of the occupants, or you've got to basically button it up to close it down. Next time. Essential, okay, we missed a line, but I'm going to read the line in and leave that right up the way it is. What you're seeing on the screen right now is preceded by a phrase that is essential construction may proceed to the extent that, and you'll see it on your, if you've got the website up, essential construction may proceed to the extent that, and now come the bullet points. This is all new. Well, some of the content we will find in the March 27 guidance, but format is new, content is expanded a great deal.
Ed, can I ask something?
Please do.
I hate to interrupt. So, in the context that this is in, with the understanding that governmental entities municipalities and school districts are exempt, right?
Right?
Is it safe to say we should maybe think of this in two separate buckets, one for private work and one for the other public work as we go through this? Just to keep in the back of your mind that there's different scenarios for private construction versus public construction. Would that be safe to assume?
I think it's very safe because the new guidance creates those buckets for us.
So just keep that in the
creates
back
these-
of your mind as we go through these different bullets, but at the very top, know that the first line on the prior slide, in my opinion, would define the majority of private work as opposed to
True.
public work.
It would, because public work is exempted from these.
Correct.
Now, the first bullet point we have seen in substance before on the 27th of March. The construction is for, comma, or your business supports. Roads, bridges, transit, utilities, hospitals, healthcare, homeless shelters, or public or private schools. Now, this is new in that it lists private schools as well. So apparently there were some phones ringing, I would assume in Albany, from some of our private universities around the state, saying, hey, we got a lot of work going on, and we want it to continue. So essential construction may proceed to the extent that it includes public, which they now say again actually for a third time, or private schools. Questions are coming through here. We'll get to the questions later. Second bullet, the construction is for affordable housing. This is the affordable housing exception. It is better defined, I think, with this guidance of today's date than it was defined last on the 27th of March. Although I have seen Manhattan affordable housing closed down. I have one job in New York where photographs were taken of people, of construction trade workers on lunch hour, and they were within 6 feet of each other, so somebody raised a fuss and sent pictures off to the mayor's office and others, and the developer ended up shutting it down even though it was affordable housing. So it's done for now. Third bullet, construction is necessary to protect the health and safety of occupants of a structure. Now, this may sound familiar, and it sounds familiar because I've already read it, because it's listed above in the paragraph that introduces these bullet paragraphs, which means it's unnecessary to put it here again.
Question, Counselor.
Yes, sir.
So on this particular bullet, it says to protect the health and safety of occupants of a structure. Is it safe to assume they mean occupants, meaning people?
That is safe to assume.
Not equipment.
Oh, yeah.
The reason I ask is because a structure is not yet complete. You have recently installed hundreds of thousands of dollars of X in there, and it's being exposed to the elements. Can you protect equipment within a structure to protect it from the elements? Would that be under this category?
Well, it wouldn't be here, but it would be elsewhere.
Okay.
Okay? Because you've worked on perhaps essential manufacturing, or you've worked on essential retail, or essential service. Okay? So I think you could definitely, at a minimum, button that up.
So there was a bucket somewhere where this would fall into.
I believe there would.
Perfect, thank you.
The next bullet, again, is repeated from what I read above, so it's unnecessary to have it here, but here it is again. The construction is necessary to continue a project if allowing the project to remain undone would be unsafe, provided the construction must be shut down when it is safe to do so. The old law review editor in me gets upset about these things when they're poorly drafted or commas are misused, which we see again here as we did on March 27th. There's another bullet here that construction is for projects in the energy industry. In accordance with the facts, FAQ, question 14. Tom, I believe we have that next. I have it here for your information. Go ahead. Nope, I don't. Right there.
There it is.
So if you look on the Esd website under the frequently asked questions, you will find the relevant 14, and you will see what is discussed in here with regard to energy industry projects. utility O&M and capital activities, okay? And I'll refer you to that. If you have any questions about that, send them on our way. Now, one of Earl's favorites, go back please a slide, Tom. One of Earl Hall's favorites, one of my law partner Jason Bailey's favorites, and needless to say, one of mine, is this. On March 27, the ESD guidance included, where I have the word old, it read, for purposes of this section, construction work does not include a single worker who is the sole employee / worker on a job site. Now, one of my own personal rants by way of a footnote is somebody apparently got a new key on their keyboard and had a slash mark on it, because slash marks are repeatedly used throughout these guidance where through this guidance where frankly they shouldn't be used. A slash mark can be a conjunctive or a disjunctive. It can be all kinds of things. It changes with context. And what you should have in something that's to guide you is not something that can be an ambiguous thing, but something that ought to be certain. But enough for my rant. The new guidance of today's date reads as follows. Essential construction may proceed to the extent that the construction work is being completed by a single worker who is the sole employee / worker on the job site. I'm going to look over to Earl Hall here in a second and ask Earl to apply his decades of experience and tell me what that means. But Jason and I discussed this at length this morning. And when people called us, and Jason and I, one of the things we were contacted the most about was that old guidance at the top half of the slide that's on your screen. What does it mean? We had some people trying to offer some pretty creative interpretations of that. You know, we're going to do a job one person at a time and things of that nature. That's otherwise not an exempt job. And the best and most intellectually honest advice we could give anybody was, we don't know. Because as it was drafted, the old clause is very ambiguous. It is clearly subject to at least 2 potentially meritorious interpretations. And in an attempt to make it better, they didn't. Okay? Essential construction may proceed to the extent that the construction work is being completed by a single worker who is the sole employee / worker on the job site. Now, we're already dealing with essential construction, so why do we need this bullet point?
You don't.
You don't. We're already dealing with essential construction. Is this a qualification? And it's not, but I'm just going to offer this as an ambiguity. Is this a qualification? It says any essential project can only have one worker on site? No, it doesn't say that. But the way it's been constructed into the ESD guidance does not solve the problem that was created by the March 27 guidance, in my opinion. Mr. Hall, maybe you are always free to differ with me.
Well, no, I tried to this morning, not on this one, but on other things. But we debated many of these different bullet points, and what they've done is they've significantly changed the definition of this last bullet point. They have removed for purposes of this section. Okay, so now, arguably, historically, in the past couple of weeks, one could argue that they could have gone out and performed work to install, I'm making this up, a light fixture or a window on their own.
One guy.
One guy on a non-essential construction project. This new guidance clearly states otherwise, in my opinion, and I think it jives with what you're saying. The only work that can be performed is essential construction, and essential construction can only proceed according to these different bullet points. So this bullet in particular has been significantly changed and impacts some businesses that historically, the last few weeks, might have been working, who may not otherwise be working
True.
after today.
True. And I don't know if that was the intent or not. But there it is. I told you we were going to bring to you information, and that's information with regard to today's ESD guidance, but much more to come. Tom, what is the next slide? I hope I caught a clause. Next one after that. Okay. Before I do that, I want to read to you something that I apologize didn't make it onto a slide, my fault, but ought to have. And it's a bullet point that precedes the one we last talked about.
Yes, thank you. I was going to go
Okay.
there. Yeah.
And it's my fault. And that is this. Looking at number 9, essential construction may proceed to the extent that the construction is for existing, paren. I don't know if Tom, if you can find that. Tom is a wizard at creating PowerPoint slides. The construction is for existing, paren, i.e. currently underway, close paren, projects of an essential business. Okay? It's not on a slide that exists. We'd have to create a new one. And I apologize for that oversight. The construction is for existing. Now, we are talking about, this is an important change. We are talking about number 9, construction, which begins with all non-essential construction must safely shut down unless there's an emergency. That's followed by essential construction may proceed. Essential construction may proceed to the extent that it's one of the things in these bullet points that we've been talking about. New bullet point, the construction is for existing, paren, i.e. currently underway, close paren, projects of an essential business. That means not new work. That means something that's already ongoing. A fair interpretation of this, to me, and Earl, who I've known for decades and is always free to argue with me on these points, but a credible interpretation of this clause that is added in here for today, by today's guidance, is that your project must be underway, not something that has not yet started. And if it has not yet started, it's not exempt. Earl?
Well, I'm not going to argue with you because we prepped for this, and we wouldn't want to argue in front of everybody. However, question, Ed. In regards to this bullet point, and Ed is working now to see if we can get this up on the computer, so bear with us for just a second. Keep in mind, Counselor, that this would be for private construction, because my understanding is that governmental municipalities and school districts are exempt from this. So if there is a new municipal or governmental or school district project that is yet started, do they fall under this category, or would they be exempt from this bullet point?
They are in their own bucket. They're in their own bucket.
Yep.
Go ahead, Earl. I'm going to talk to
Yeah.
Tom for just a second.
So as we talked about before, we need to keep in mind that we do have 2 different categories. And while we can debate the merits of having 2 separate categories, one for private and one for public, we need to keep in mind here that these items here are for projects that would otherwise be in the in the private sector realm, permissible only if you apply as an essential business who would be performing new construction. So it's alarming that the government has authority to carve out private sector versus public sector and to treat the governmental sector the way that they do, to give them the authority to deem things to be essential and exempt themselves from the same rules that society is subject to. But here we are, and they've done that. So keep that in mind.
It's bothersome to me as somebody who's exists in this business. Whenever I look at it and I realize that if I could be building a hot dog stand at a middle school playground, and I can proceed. I can build my hot dog stand. But a new, not exempt private project has to stop.
Yep.
That hasn't started yet. And if I would like to think people are bringing this to the attention of whoever their political representatives are, because this, to me, is a philosophical concern, an academic concern, and a big deal practical concern.
Agreed.
So I'm going to read it. Tom, are you able to conjure up a slide?
It's up there. As long as you guys.
Okay.
So,
Let's see. It's up?
Yeah.
Okay. We can't see it, but Tom assures me it's up. So I'm going to read again. I want to just do it before we move on. Number 9 is construction. It starts by telling us all non-essential must safely shut down except for emergencies. Then, essential construction may proceed to the extent that, then follow the bullet points. Essential construction may proceed to the extent that the construction is for existing, paren, i.e. currently underway, close paren projects of an essential business. So you may be an essential business in this list, but you might have a project that's going to start tomorrow. It can't proceed. I don't know if this was the intent, but in my opinion, it's what they wrote.
Well, we're going to get into a couple of questions specific to how in the world do I go about bidding future work, Counselor, and what changes to the contracts do we need to include in there to protect ourselves?
Yeah, we're going to circle back to that because that's a big deal. That's a real big deal. And I'll get into it later, but I do just want to comment. A lot of folks have asked me, what do we put in our letter? What do we put in our notice? And I hear it a lot. Jason gets it a lot in emails and phone calls and text messages. The problem is, as I said when I began, we don't have your contract sitting here right now. We don't have your subcontract. We don't have your PO with terms and conditions on the back. So what you have to say, when you have to say it, by way of notice, will change based upon the contracts, okay? Which we can't advise about unless it's in front of somebody taking a look at it. Tom, what's next? At every site? At every site, it is required, of course, that personnel working on the site maintain an appropriate social distance. And this is not a surprise. This doesn't particularly bother me. Sites that cannot maintain appropriate social distancing, as well as cleaning / there's the old slash mark again, disinfecting protocols must close. This ties into Earl Hall's comment from earlier in this webinar, a question that I received from several of our GCs, and that Jason received as well from several of his GCs regarding, you know, if we can give our guys respirator or higher end breathing masks, can they violate the 6-foot social distancing requirement? What I advised clients under the March 27 guidelines doesn't change, and that is there's nothing that I have seen published by any agency of the state, certainly not by ESD, that says you can be a foot apart if you're wearing a respirator. Earl?
I would agree with that comment. However, I want to muddy the waters because that's exactly what ESD has done here. So if we look back, and we don't have to now, but the opening paragraph on page number 1, okay, directly conflicts with what is on section 9 and what we just read, because on page number 1, it in essence says, is strongly urged to maintain social distancing measures to the extent possible. Okay, and then you flip to section 9, sites that cannot maintain appropriate social distancing, as well as cleaning, disinfecting protocols, must close. The confusion is there, but I would suggest, from a layman's perspective only, that for construction only, this is pretty clear, this sentence. It's one sentence, and it's very clear to me that unless you can practice and maintain disinfecting protocols and cleaning protocols along with social distancing, the project must close. And that is where, Ed, many of our contractors are getting jammed up on projects that are essential by public owners.
Yeah, yes.
Public owners
Yes,
want
yes.
their job to proceed. They want to shift their responsibility back to our subcontractors and general contractors and say, hey, come up with a safety plan that addresses these 2 items and adhere to it. Well, in some cases, it is impossible and impractical to exercise a policy that allows you to do this in particular instances. And I'll give you some examples. Hanging sheetrock, for example.
Right.
Installing windows, arguably. I have a tile setting contractor who says, how in the world do I have a tile setting crew setting tiles with just one guy? So there's some real life on the job challenges for contractors to adapt. And when you adjust to social distancing practices, it now impacts a company from either A, performing their work on time, or B, performing it safely. And now installing different measures to get that particular scope of work done. And I have one example that I'd like to read to you, Ed, if I may, if I can find it. I believe it's a text message from somebody. Give me 1 second here. Oh, it's an email. So they have to now, this is from a window company, window and glazing. I'm being informed that I may need to change my method of installation of pre-glazed windows to continue the work per contract by possibly adding equipment, automated lifts, etc., or other methods to continue to work under our contract. So now this is adding additional cost to perform their scope of work in order to comply with the new guidance from ESD that they did not anticipate when they bid the work.
Yep.
So do we have ability to make a claim to the general contractor, or do we need to file a claim for added costs for these procedures and equipment? So, I don't know if we want to get into that now, but my point was, while you may perform essential work on essential projects, it is not that simple, and that there are significant problems that our employers are up against on a daily basis just to perform work, assuming you fall into one of these silos for one of these project owners. Counselor, any comments?
We do work for private developers, large and small. We do work for public owners, some towns, some schools, and everybody else down the chain, to manufacturers, reps, and everybody in between. And when we did this a couple weeks ago, I very naively, very philosophically said, now is the time for the design professional and the owner and the contractor and the subs. Remember I said
Yeah,
this?
I do.
To sit down together around a table and figure out how they're going to get this done together. And what happened the day after I said that here was I got a letter that somebody forwarded to me from an engineering firm that was just awful.
Yep.
That refused to take a position. It moved waffly back and forth, and at the very end said, well, we're going to be there tomorrow, you better be there.
Yep.
Okay? Completely the opposite of what I had hoped would happen, and of course I'm not that naive. I've been doing this, what I'm doing now, for 35 years, even though I don't look that old. So we are in a situation, in an aggressive, strong-willed business with aggressive, strong-willed people. And when a condition arrives, like the one that Earl has identified, don't even bother to ask yourself the question, can I make a claim? Make it. Reserve whatever your rights are. If you're a subcontractor and a general contractor or prime is pressuring you to do something in this setting, form work in a trench. Okay, we're doing form work in a trench. Are we forming for a foundation for a column in a small space, or are we forming along a 60-foot line where people can maybe spread out more? Okay? If you're being ordered to do something that you believe to be extra work, regardless of where you are in the pecking order, you need to look to your contract and preserve your rights. That's the first thing you need to do. You can work it out or argue about it, or if you have to, litigate it later. But look to your notice of claim clauses for additional money and additional time. Very, very, very important to look at both. Look at the supplementary conditions that change your general conditions. You might have an AIA or a consensus doc. In all likelihood, there's something behind it somewhere, or maybe in the front end of the spec, that changes or modifies things. For instance, the amount of time you have to make a claim. It might be standard AIA and read 21 days, but then somebody might shorten it to 3 days. Look at the whole thing. You got to comply with these things, people. Courts are very, very strictly applying them in very disappointing ways. People are losing literally millions of dollars in claims because they were late. Don't be late. This is your business. If you're like most upstate New York construction companies, you may be in your second generation that was started by your parents. You might be the first generation that rolled the dice, got out there in the field, and made it happen. And now you're the owner of a $5, $10, $20, $40 million a year construction company. Everything you've done, you got to protect. And you got to protect it by knowing what your contract says you got to do to protect it. Did I rant?
I think we're on to the next paragraph, Counselor.
I think we are.
You've covered that well.
Now here's one. Tom, this one begins with construction may continue. Is that what's up on the screen?
Yep.
Okay, there it is. This is another one that my partner Jason Bailey and I debated about today, and then I debated about it with Mr. Hall. Take a minute and look at this. This is new to the April 9 to today's ESD guidance. Construction may continue solely with respect to those employees that must be present at the business location / construction site in support of essential activities, period. No other employees / personnel shall be permitted to work in person at the business location / construction site, period. Any other business activities being completed that are not essential are still subject to the restrictions provided by EO 202. And by the way, EO 2.2 was the first one, which by itself didn't really give us a lot of restrictions. In the 14 modifications that came out, the 14 subsequent executive orders, things were done, written, so forth and so on. This is at least the second time in today's guidance that we see a reference to EO 202, Executive Order 202, where it does not reference 202.1 through 202.14. So, does ESD expect us to read that into this and assume what they mean is 202 and all of its points, point 1 through point 14? Or does ESD expect us to look at only EO 202 and see if the question is answered there? I don't have an answer because I didn't draft the thing. You can bet on that. However, and this is another case where somebody with a slash mark on their keyboard decided to put in slash marks when they could have and should have worded this much differently. Sorry, I had another call coming in. Diane, are you still with us?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, good. One very meritorious, in my opinion, interpretation of this clause is that this clause is meant to be directed to construction companies. Okay? The employees present at the business location, if it's Ed and Earl's Speedy Drywall, okay, and our office is at Ridings Road, that's our business location. And this talks about employees present there in support of essential business activities only. So what if we have employees at Ed and Earl's Speedy Drywall? Well, first of all, what if we have no accepted work? What if none of our work is public and none of our work comes under the other exceptions, the 14 listed ones and all the subparts? Earl, we have nothing that is exempt. We do no public work. Can we have anybody show up to work under this clause?
The way that I read it, which was confirmed by you and Jason, is that the answer is no. You cannot have your employees show up to your business location to perform work. Now, that does not mean that they can't work from home, which we hope that they would do. It just means that they cannot be present at the physical construction company's business location if you have no essential work for essential owners, businesses.
So if Tom Chick across the way there is our estimator, he can work from home,
Of course.
can't come into the office. Okay? If Tom Chick over there is our scheduler, he does our scheduling, he can be our scheduler.
Yep.
But he's going to do it from home. Okay, that's how we see the operation of this clause. I could say it much more clearly, and but I didn't write it. So we'll just move on from there, Earl.
Yes, sir.
Tom, next one, as noted. Okay, we should have a slide that says as no, oh, we did it already. I apologize. We did it. So we covered the next paragraph, which is Public Works, when I moved it up to the beginning of our discussion.
But
I crushed two together. So do you want to go back to this?
I'd like to go back to this in the interest of time, because we want to be done no later than 5, if we could be,
Oh, boy.
or maybe shortly thereafter. But
And you're
with
having
that
fun.
said, the second paragraph, Ed, on the last paragraph, I'm sorry,
Tom, would you go back?
the last paragraph of number 9,
Oh,
And
as
it's-
noted above?
and it's the second sentence that reads, however, to the greatest extent possible, comma, local government should postpone any non-essential projects and only proceed with essential projects when they can implement appropriate social distancing and cleaning, disinfecting protocols. Notice they use the word "and" in there. So to the greatest extent possible, local governments, which are we to assume that includes municipalities and school districts?
That's a fair reading.
Okay, should postpone any non-essential projects.
Should.
To your point,
Should.
the hot dog stand at Liverpool High School, I'm using that as an
Yep.
example. It's a poor example because that's my district and they're not doing that work. But at a local school district that's building a hot dog concession stand that may not be essential to a prudent person. But yet, the word should really doesn't mean anything in this case. It allows the public owner to do whatever the heck they want to do, right?
I have to agree. I have to. Tom, it might be hard to find if our listeners can be patient with us, but that's the clause Earl was talking about, right there. And the point that Earl made had to do with, I believe, Earl, the second and third sentences within this clause, where you see, however, to the greatest extent possible, local governments should.
So maybe that's something for the contractors to think about and maybe get advice of counsel on when working for a very difficult public owner who may be performing work, making you perform work on what a prudent person would define as non-essential and in violation of the spirit of this paragraph. And push back to the extent that you can. And there's methods in which you can do that that attorneys will advise you on. But I would suggest that you seek advice of counsel when you do have a very difficult public owner and figure out ways to get them to back off. And they exist, and I'll leave it at that.
Good deal. So that it doesn't complete our webinar, but we are getting to that point. But that does generally end the portion on construction. However, I want to look at the two other added exemptions. Tom, if you can flip back forward there, where is recreation, or when he was preparing, as Tom said, Parks and Rec. And this is a new, I mentioned when we started that the March 27 guidance had 12 exempted items and then all the bullets underneath them. We now have 14. This is number 13. Exempted business, parks and rec. See, Tom, you made me say it. Recreation. Parks and other open spaces, except playgrounds or other areas of congestion where social distancing cannot be abided. Golf courses are not essential.
What about Green Lakes, Counselor? That's a
Well-
state-owned entity.
Is it?
Yes, sir.
Oh, that's right. Is that open?
It will be.
However, use of boat launches and marinas for recreational vessels is not considered essential. Well, this is not construction, I know. So I don't want to get tied around that. But golf courses are not essential. But what about a public golf course?
So
They fall into the public bucket, do they not?
our county executive has issued that all public and private golf courses are now shut down. However, Green Lakes, when it opens next week, is exempt from that because it's a state-owned property. So where do you think all of the golfers in Onondaga County, Mr. Sheats, are going to go play golf when Green Lakes opens?
It's not going to be Drumlin's. Which is the only place that lets me golf, I think. And then the next one, Tom, for your information, professional services, look at that. Lawyers got their name in the thing, and real estate. And those are there for your reference. They don't deal with our industry, so I'm going to move on. What do we have next on the slides? Probably nothing. Well, okay. There are some changes with regard to the way to apply for exceptions and so forth. There are changes with regard to churches and houses of worship that will probably anger some people, but I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole because it's not construction. And these are, you can take a look on the website at the restrictions on requesting designation as an essential business. Okay? Tom, why don't you put the email addresses back up there? And I am about done, Mr. Hall. I've got
Okay.
some questions here. Can I take one of those?
Sure. You want to start with what you have? I mean, I've got a couple here as
Why
well.
don't you do a couple? I'll rest my voice. Besides, people are tired of hearing my voice.
I think we covered this one. Let me read it here. Are my non-essential projects with 2 or more workers permitted? Meaning that this employer was sending out an individual employee to a project that was non-essential. And I think we might have covered this.
Yep.
So by virtue of this new order, if it's a private entity and it's a non-essential project, you can't send anybody to it any longer,
I would agree.
okay? Here we go. We have been doing service work in school buildings. After completing work on a project today, we learned that someone in the building tested positive for COVID-19. What are building owners' responsibilities for disclosing this information?
Diana, I'm going to turn to you. Did you hear that?
I heard tested positive for COVID-19.
Well, hold on. I'm going to have Earl reread it with the, so you can hear it better.
We have been doing service work in school buildings. After completing work on a project today, we learned that someone in the building tested positive for COVID-19. What are building owners' responsibilities for disclosing this information?
Well, building owners, they need to disclose, they need to talk to the person who tested positive, if it was the employee's boss who tested positive. They need to find out who that employee was within 6 feet of, in close distance. They need to notify those people that they were within close distance of an individual who tested positive, and those people need to go self-quarantine also, as well as the individual who tested positive. That's what they have to do. They then can put a notice out if they would like to everybody there saying that an individual tested positive. Do not name that person's name. This person was working, on site in this area. We have talked to everybody who was named in close contact. If we haven't talked to you, then you weren't in close contact. And we have taken all precautions as recommended by the CDC and DOH. They must clean the area and disinfect the area, though, before they allow anybody back in.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, stay there, Diana. Don't leave us yet. Earl, you have another?
I do. If public schools are now deemed essential, does this apply to all trades or just essential work that is necessary to keep the project safe and watertight? For example, is installing interior finishes allowable under this guideline? And I believe we covered this as well.
We did,
If it is a project that has been deemed essential
right.
for a business that is deemed essential, then that project and all of the contents therein and all of the scopes required to complete that project are able to perform work on that project. Is that how you hear it, Ed?
It
as
is,
well?
yep. Yep. Look to the ESD guidance, go on the website, and see if your project is defined by one of the 14 essential businesses. If you're working for one of the essential listed healthcare businesses or infrastructure, manufacturing, retail, essential services, or others, then you're probably good to go.
Here's another quick question, and this is a simple answer, I believe. Do we need to apply to ESD if we meet the new specifications for having customers that are defined as essential? So the answer would be no. You don't need to
Right.
apply for anything from ESD if you meet the standards that we talked about previously. And then he goes on to say, what is the expected return from the application from ESD? And that, I couldn't even begin to guess. It might fall into the black hole there, Ed. I don't know.
I've been asked that a number of times, and we just plain don't know. We don't know. I'm looking at the ESD, today's guidance too, and I'd just like to remind people, requests by businesses to be designated as essential function as described above should only be made if they are not, all caps, covered by the guidance. And language to that effect existed with the previous guidance. So you're being told, if you fall into this list, don't ask us, is the way I read that.
Exactly.
Don't ask. So if you are, pick any. If you're auto repair, you are under number 5, essential services, you are auto repair. And auto repair is in here somewhere else too. You're being told, don't ask us. I mean, that's right here on the website. Don't ask. If you're on the list, don't write us, is what the ESD guidance says. I don't blame them. It makes sense. I know they've been trying their best, and I know they've been deluged by emails and phone calls and all kinds of other things. Earl, to answer your question, I have no idea how long it's going to take for somebody to get a reply. However, I had a question that was either yesterday or today from somebody who was one of your members who had made the request several weeks ago, and they still had no response.
One last question, then we can get to yours.
Sure.
So this relates to the masonry contractor that I talked about previously. They're a large tile setting contractor in upstate New York. If we are sending a limited crew back to a site and asking our employees to work alone, where they would normally be working as a team of 2, and therefore inefficiently working, should we be filing a delay claim for an extension of time?
Well, if you have to ask the question, the answer is yes. Really,
Thank you.
really, you do. You need to err in favor of protecting your company. I have a question here from a roofing contractor, and he wrote to us. He said, "Thank you for your help with this matter. Can you please clarify to what degree roofing is allowed? I understand that roofing projects for essential projects may continue, correct?" Yes, you're correct. Or emergency, or to protect the occupants, okay? However, Earl, the gentleman adds, today we received information from Syracuse code enforcement that states roofing is essential.
Yes, I got that.
You got that? I didn't get that. You'll have to get that to me. And he then asks, can you clarify what roofing projects can be done? I think we answered that by looping back above. If the roofing is being done for one of the 14 essential businesses or falls under the construction provisions here in the new guidance, then you're free to earn a living.
Yeah, if the owner is a governmental entity,
Public Works.
and the city of Syracuse clearly falls into that category, then they're free to determine a project essential, right?
Yep.
And I do have some good news. We have a viewer who just emailed me that says it looks like New York State is going to close Green Lakes Golf Course until April 28th. So now all the courses around here are shut down.
Seems fair.
Yeah, it seems reasonable. So that's good news.
We have a number of other questions that have come through that some are rather lengthy. I'm going to, Diana, are you with us?
Yeah.
Can two people ride together to and from job sites? Or do they have to drive separately? Some jobs are 3 hours.
As the member employer, make a decision that's best for your company and your staff. Safety is certainly paramount, yet we understand that to the extent that you can continue to work, I suspect you'd like to. Whether or not your employees show up to work is another matter, but you can address that when the time happens. So we would close this out by encouraging members to contact the association with anything that comes across your desk that I need to be aware of. I do have a line to Senator Schumer's office and Congressman Katko's office. I spoke to both of their offices yesterday. They're receptive to the industry and appreciate having a resource here locally. If you have legal matters or insurance-related matters, while you may send them here, I'm going to defer to the professionals that cover those. And I would encourage you to contact your attorney, be it Sheats and Bailey or somebody else, whoever you might use, in an effort to add clarity and to protect yourselves. So with that said, we're signing off for today. Stay tuned, and you have a good evening.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Earl.
Thank you, Ed. Bye-bye.